What's up, everyone? We're back for another episode of Locked On Bucks, and as promised, Andy Larsen is here, covers the Utah Jazz. We're going to talk plenty of Joe Ingles. We're also just going to talk general Utah Jazz stuff because it's chaos in Salt Lake City. And we're going to find out whether Donovan Mitchell is going to shape the Eastern Conference. The Jazz are making things happen right across the league, so there's plenty to discuss. So let's get started.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Bucks. I'm your host, Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on this show Monday to Friday. Also find my other stuff over at ESPN, and alongside me today from the Salt Lake Tribune, it is Andy Larsen, a fantastic NBA writer, but not only that, a man who's part of the rare club of American basketball writers that I've drank beers with in the fine city of Melbourne. Andy, it's a pleasure.
Dude, I was just thinking about that. I need to get back to Australia, and I don't know when that will be. Honestly, Melbourne might be my favorite city in the world. It was so much fun hanging out with you guys. Obviously, like those wonderful restaurants and breweries and whatever else on the river, and the lovely parks there. Anyway, it was a joy, and I love my 2 weeks I spent in Australia, and yeah, would definitely do it again. No questions asked.
So just to clarify, this was the World Cup. It was actually exhibition games before the World Cup, warm-up games, whatever you want to call them. But I think Donovan Mitchell was playing, which is probably why you were out there, as well as Team USA. But Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez were out there for the Bucks. So I know a lot has happened since then. But I was just thinking, it's the middle of July, so it's literally 3 years ago, which is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, I think we were there. I was there like end of August, if I remember right. So just a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, still. And you think about it, and it's like 3 full NBA seasons have happened since then. And it felt like 3 seasons combined into like 2.5 years, right? With like all of the bubble stuff and everything that's happened. I mean, it's a little bit bonkers. And honestly, during that 3-year period, the Jazz mostly stayed the same, except for over the last month when things have gotten a little bit hectic, you might say.
All right. So as always, we thank everyone for making Locked On Bucks their first listen or first watch of every day. We're on YouTube. If you haven't tried it out, you can see Andy's fine face right here today. And I question anybody that wants to look at me daily, but you can do it if you really, really want to. One other player that played in those games, those Australia versus Team USA games, was Joe Ingles, who's someone that Bucks fans are certainly very fascinated about now. I guess the first thing I just wanted to ask, it was really interesting. We were talking about it a lot here in Australia. Obviously, he's someone I've got great interest in and have for a long time as well. But when he did tear his ACL, it was certainly spoken about that he could potentially be traded. But I haven't really been able to get a good grasp on whether that was well received, not well received by all parties. Was there anything that was he treated badly? How did that all play out?
You know, it was weird because he definitely saw it coming, right? Like he's a smart guy and as well, like established with the CBA and team building and like talks with Adrian Wojnarowski relatively frequently. Like Joe is as plugged in to like the NBA trade ideas as any player in the NBA that I've ever covered or encountered, right? And so like he kind of knew like, okay, at this point I'm an expiring contract and I have torn my ACL, so I'm not going to be able to play for the Jazz moving forward, at least not for the rest of the season. So it would make sense for a team that is contending to trade my contract and try to get someone who can contribute on the court, right? Like, and that turned out to be Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Juancho Hernan-Gomez, who actually kind of contributed more. After the trade, though, he was kind of sour about it a little bit in a way that I don't think I anticipated, and certainly like his public comments wouldn't have anticipated. Publicly, again, he was very supportive and kind of understanding of the idea that he might be traded for something that would help the Jazz. And then after he was traded, I think he felt a little bit of remorse and a little bit of kind of that, hey, the team that used to believe in me doesn't believe in me anymore kind of pangs. Obviously it's a new front office in Utah. I think that's played a role there too, but like he did kind of react more emotionally than I thought he would, and kind of revealed some misgivings and revealed some kind of negative feelings about being traded in the way that he was. Now, and kind of wanted to establish himself with the Portland Trailblazers, even though he never played with them, right? Like he made a show of putting on the Trailblazers jersey and tweeting about that and his new number with the Portland Trailblazers, all this kind of stuff, where obviously he's going to play 0 minutes with Trailblazers. So, it was kind of weird from that point of view, and kind of inconsistent. And the only thing that I can think to explain it is like it's just one thing to think that you're going to be traded, and another thing to kind of go through that emotional experience of being traded. And I think that's kind of what Joe ran into and kind of felt different things about when the process happened. And I don't know, maybe the process didn't happen in the way that he thought it would, but to me it seemed really pretty straightforward. Like, this is what I expected to happen. And anyway, it was just kind of very interesting how that happened, for sure.
By the way, if there are any Bucks fans that are listening to this that don't follow Joe on Twitter, highly recommend it. There is some very, very good content, including recently, I think someone tweeted to him and said, you're only going to play 5 minutes with the Bucks or something like that. And he was like, well, it'll be 5 minutes more than you've ever played in the NBA or something like that. So he's good. It's good content. And I do think, and this is just me from afar speculating, but clearly you would have seen and heard, and most people would. I mean, he's extremely competitive. So I think that there is probably a part of him that feels that there has been a lot of people that have written him off. There was a lot of talk about his play before the injury, and he probably thinks, I got plenty left in the tank, and I'm gonna prove you guys wrong. But as far as his play did go to start 2021-22, let's start defensively, because I think that's where a lot of people are really focused on with how he could fit in the Bucks. Could he be a guy that comes in and plays a big part in a playoff rotation? What did you see defensively up until the injury?
It wasn't to his peak standard of, I think peak Joe Ingles defense was the Oklahoma City series against Paul George, right? Like where he was legitimately pest, legitimately very annoying. And he's so big, 6'9", 6'8" guy, like with pretty good length. And yeah, he's obviously not quick, but like uses his size and strength really well to frustrate guys like Paul George. This year, I think he was clearly a lot less mobile and maybe just a lot less feisty than he had been in previous defensive years. And, I think there are kind of numerous explanations for that. I think the most obvious one, and kind of the one that you have to be afraid of if you're a Bucks fan, is that he's just older now than he was then. And so like naturally he's going to have like that diminished athleticism and diminished like verve for the game, if you will, but I think there's also kind of a reasonably equal and likely explanation that like, hey, he was just kind of tired after the Olympics experience and the shortened off season of the bubble and the summer league and everything else, and having had played, kind of 3 seasons in the course of 2 years. So it's going to be interesting, after an ACL tear. Obviously that's a really tough injury to get back from. But he's going to be more rested and more motivated than ever too to help the Bucks. I think I don't think that he was necessarily a super negative defender. Frankly, I think the take foul rules are really going to hurt him. I don't know that like anyone used more take fouls than Joe Ingles did in transition, because he is not, an elite transition defender. But it's going to be interesting to see like, to what extent the rest outweighs the aging and the ACL return and that kind of stuff.
Well, speaking of energy, I don't know if you've heard about Built Bar. Has David Locke, maybe in the media room, has he flicked you guys some Built Bars over the years or anything like that?
We don't get any. Built Bar is a Provo-based company, I think. So they're based here in Utah.
That's why we got Andy on the pod. This is already the best Built Bar. This is already the best Built Bar ad read we've had in the history of the show. But we're talking about the coconut brownie chunk puff today, which does sound pretty delicious to me. They're from the people that invented healthy and tasty. Comes the latest gift to your taste buds. You've probably tried the amazing coconut brownie chunk Built Bar, but now they're giving it the puff treatment. That's right. Coconut brownie chunk Built Bar is now in a deliciously chewy marshmallow covered in 100% real chocolate. It's fluffy. It's a fluffy cloud of brownie goodness. And the good news is, of course, it's healthy for you as well. As they use collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. Eat something that tastes good and is also good for you at the same time. They're not going to be around forever, though. And Frank, My co-host was very upset last week with a particular flavor that disappeared, and this is what they do at Built Bar. They'll bring in the new flavors. So go to built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 at built.com. Which NFL stars move the betting line the most starting July 18th? Locked On gives you the 50 most valuable players in the NFL from the odds makers at Bet Online. Available July 18th on Locked On NFL, wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube. If we just stay on the defensive side of the ball, as we keep discussing Joe Ingles here, my optimistic take, or the most optimistic view that I can potentially take here, is that you already mentioned the fatigue stuff. That's certainly something I've mentioned. I don't think he was the only player that probably suffered a bit from the Olympics and those types of things. The quality of perimeter defense on the Bucks, in terms of having a Drew Holiday out there, obviously playing alongside Giannis in a team that should be top 5-ish defensively, certainly by the time they get to postseason basketball. I'm wondering if the quality of individual defenders on the team will help him. And then also, just to your point, it's going to be a short season for Joe. And then that might be a good thing as well. Obviously, he's going to have to get back into form, but that could help.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. And, obviously had maybe, the longest or close to the longest defender in Rudy Gobert, but elsewhere on the Jazz's roster was really small. I mean, you look at the Jazz's 3 starters, whether that's Mike Conley, Donovan Mitchell, and Royce O'Neal, all those guys below 6'4", Conley 6'0", Donovan 6'1", 6'2", Royce O'Neal 6'4", that's just a very different setup than what the Bucks have, and Bojan Bogdanovic as a 4 compared to like Giannis is obviously a very different story. So yeah, I think it could help with his weaknesses, and his weaknesses are not so much as like one-on-one individual. I didn't think he was being killed in ISO situations or anything. Again, it was kind of like in those half spaces, in transition, in rotation, when he's being asked to help down low. He would be either late to that spot or just kind of do the Olay defense. Hey, I don't want to commit a foul here, so I'm going to let you get to the rim. And it's less about kind of the perimeter aspect of it and more the interior aspect of it. So I do think that like probably the Bucks' defensive personnel around Joe makes more sense and will kind of probably make him look better than he otherwise would have in a Jazz uniform.
So if we go to the other side of the ball then, because again, when you talk about prime Joe Ingles, you're talking, what was it, like 3 seasons ago when the pick and roll with Derek Favors was the most unstoppable force in the NBA. And I think everyone looks at it and they're like, sure, he's going to get wide open threes in this offense. He's probably going to be able to knock them down at a pretty decent clip. That did drop off last year. I'm curious if you have any reasons why that would be the case. And then I guess the other element to what Bucks fans will be hoping he can bring is, can he bring that secondary ball handling still at a decent level?
Yeah, I have no reason why the 3-point shooting would go down. I think he was taking pretty much the same shots. I think probably, to me, the thing that makes most sense there is variance, or maybe you can say, hey, the rest there impacts the legs and so on and so forth. But like, to me, I think probably variance is the most likely thing there. I didn't see anything different in practice or shoot-arounds that he was doing. I think he's still going to be very likely an awesome 3-point shooter. And then, like from kind of a pick and roll point of view, you're right. Like he is masterful at the pick and roll. And, not only with Derek Favors 3 years ago, but even in the last couple of seasons with Rudy Gobert, really got pick and roll chemistry and really, threw him lobs better than anyone else on the Jazz. The pass fake dish or pass fake layup is probably the signature shot for Joe and is truly so much fun and super effective and should continue to be no matter kind of who he's running pick and roll with. Obviously, like defenders are still going to be worried about Giannis pick and rolls or whoever it is, Bobby Portis even. I think I think I guess the one concern would be if he is moving less well on the offensive end. Can he still get all the way to the rim? He's gotten more of a floater and kind of more of a mid-range game in the last couple of years, but really it is nearly less than every other player in the NBA, right? Like he just goes to it so rarely. And so I think if he can't get all the way to the rim, if the pass fake stops working, if he, becomes that little bit slower, it could be problematic. But I still think, overall, and it's so hard to know whether, he'll come back at 80% from the ACL or 90% or whatever it is. But it should make a lot of sense in the Bucks offense, so long as there's spacing around those lineups when he's playing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, if you just look at the Bucks roster, and we'll move into more sort of broader Utah stuff now, but if you look at the Bucks roster, they've pretty much, they've brought back every single player. And I heard someone describe the Joe Ingles addition as, now they've used a decent salary slot on him with the taxpayer mid-level, so it's a fair investment, but someone described it as, well, the Bucks have already got their buyout guy for this year, and they might add another player, but if he's healthy, I still just think it's a pretty quality addition to a team that we expect is going to be pretty good. Utah is interesting to me, and you're far more plugged in to it than what I am, but I think most people assume there was going to be some change. I'm not sure how many people predicted that the whole thing was going to be blown up, because when you talk about consistent teams over the last 3-4 year period, really since the Bucks have been good, the Jazz have been right there with them in the West in terms of regular season records, and in fact, a team that have given the Bucks serious troubles over the years as well. So did you see this coming?
Honestly, probably. At least in the last few months, right? Like, I think the season that was 2020, 21, 22 was so underwhelming, losing in the first round despite not really having injury problems, to a team that was missing Luka Doncic for the first half of that series. And the chemistry issues that were happening on the floor, the fact that Donovan Mitchell didn't take the step to an all-NBA caliber player, and then, the fact that they were able to get as much in return for Rudy Gobert. I think Quinn Snyder saw the writing on the wall a little bit, and that's one of the reasons he left, is like, hey, there's no real way for this team to get better, given that the supporting cast is aging, right? Like Mike Conley clearly took a step back this year. Bojan Bogdanovic didn't actually had a great season, but is just the math works out that, 34-year-olds are probably going to get worse at some point. Did you want to bring Rudy Gay had a bad season? Do you want to bring Hassan Whiteside back? They don't have any young players of note. And so it's just like, how do you get better given that you've already traded away a lot of your first round picks too? And I don't think that the Jazz had a good answer to that question. And I think that's one of the reasons Quinn Snyder stepped down. And then, obviously you got this great haul for Rudy Gobert. I think they were looking to make moves and probably break up the Donovan and Rudy core. And then frankly, at this point, what is the upside of a Donovan Mitchell led team without a realistic path to a second star? Given that Donovan's contract ends in 3 years, I guess you can, hope you draft someone and get, develop a star from the 20th pick or whatever, but that's just really hard to do. So yeah, I think it kind of makes sense. And this is the Jazz avoiding the middle a little bit of like, hey, they realized they were in the middle. They were, the 5th seed, yet again, after, kind of 3 of the last 4 years, the Jazz have been in the number 4 or number 5 seed, and realized that they weren't especially close to actually contending for a title. And at that point, it's like, okay, can we do anything to make the team better? No, then blowing it up probably is the right move in a championship or bust kind of mentality.
Yeah, you might pick up your next tall Frenchman in 12 months' time anyway, if all things work out well. I'm not a draft expert, but people seem... I'm sure there's Jazz fans that are starting to dream.
Yes, absolutely. And, the case of like Rudy Gobert playing against Victor Wembanyama do not hurt. There's a lot of speculation there. But look, if the Jazz trade Donovan, there's a real chance they're the worst team in the league next year, right? Like, their best player at that point is probably Malik Beasley or Jordan Clarkson. Like that's probably the best player in the league, right? Like, I would probably take Paolo Banchero over Jordan or Malik Beasley, right? Like it's just hard to win 20, 25 games that way even. So it's going to be really interesting, and it's going to be a complete shift of narrative. Obviously, new coach, new front office, like we've talked about, but like it's going to be a new era for sure.
So before I ask what do you think is going to happen with Donovan Mitchell, the other part of this Utah stuff that Bucks fans have been sending us questions in the YouTube comments and those types of things. Who else is up for sale? Because let's be honest, the Bucks don't have many options on a trade table. Honestly, the most enticing package, I'm just going to let you know, this is the package that everyone's trying to pick up someone for, is Grayson Allen, someone you're familiar with, George Hill, just for the extra salary, also someone you're familiar with, actually, and whatever, multiple second-round picks. That's literally all they're doing. And Bucks fans want to know, given the fact that Utah just got a zillion first-round picks for Rudy Gobert, maybe what they're asking has been significantly inflated. But they're asking about Patrick Beverley, Jordan Clarkson, these types of guys that are in that $10 to $15 million salary range.
They are absolutely for sale. And I think there's a world where even second-round picks can get those guys. I'm trying to think. George Hill's deal, does he have 1 year left on his deal or multiple?
1 year. One year for him, yeah.
Okay, so 1 year for him, and then Grayson Allen's deal. Yeah, I mean, honestly, there could be some matches there. I'm not going to lie. Like, the Jazz, everyone is for sale. Like, this is the term fire sale is not inaccurate. And so, I think the Jazz will take the best offer for guys like Pat Bev and Jordan Clarkson and Mike Conley. And, you can go down the list. Bojan Bogdanovic would make some sense. I think they will hope for first round picks in return for some of those guys. In particular, Bogdanovic strikes me as someone who probably is worth a first round pick given his shooting ability and honestly very good playoff performances. Mike Conley is pretty low right now after a tough playoffs, but I think they hope to rehab that a little bit. Jordan Clarkson, I think you probably could get for some seconds. And there just hasn't been a lot of trade interest in Jordan Clarkson to this point. They did look at moving him at the trade deadline along with Joe Ingles and didn't find a buyer's market. Patrick Beverley, absolutely a guy that I think they would like to get a first for some team, but if they have to settle for some seconds, I think they would probably take it. It's just not the direction that the Jazz are going in, and you have all these players who are between 31 and 34 years old. They're not going to be more valuable than they are now. That now might be the time to move them.
Interesting. You've just got some Bucks fans very excited, I'm sure. What about Donovan Mitchell? Because even before the Jazz traded Rudy Gobert, certainly I was keeping a close eye on Donovan Mitchell because it does feel like he has the potential to shape what happens in the East depending on which team he goes to, specifically if he goes to Miami, for instance, because I do think, as you pointed to, if he's your best player, maybe you're not contending for a title, but if he goes to Miami and he's playing alongside Butler and Adebayo and potentially Lowry, all these guys, I don't know what the deal would look like, then that's a pretty strong team in the East. How do you feel this is going to play out?
Yeah, I think it's almost certain that he's going to be traded, and I'd say they would really like to do it before training camp opens, and they're trying to establish a new culture with a new coach and everything else, and I think a lingering Donovan Mitchell doesn't necessarily help you with that. I think by far, the most likely option is the New York Knicks, and because they have this vast array of picks they can trade. I mean, they can trade 8 first-round picks and 4 of their own and 4 of other teams that they've acquired in trades, along with their own pick swaps as well. And then they have a number of useful young players that, from RJ Barrett to Quentin Grimes to Emmanuel Quickley to Miles McBride to Cam Reddish. I mean, they have just a whole bunch of these dudes who you would want to take a flyer on as a bad team, as a team that was building towards the future. So I think that by far is the most likely possibility. I think the Heat deal could happen. If the Knicks walk away completely and said, hey, we don't want to do this at all, you're still probably going to be able to get from the Heat Tyler Hero, probably 2 or 3 first-round picks of their own, unprotected, 3 pick swaps, something like that. And let's say Max Strus or Gabe Vincent or something, so, and also Duncan Robinson, who would be the salary ballast in that deal. I think that is significantly less likely than the Knicks option because those Miami hit picks are frankly just much more likely to be good or I guess bad picks than the Knicks picks will be, right? Like that Heat team would be better than the Knicks almost certainly. And the Heat have been a well-run organization where the Knicks have not been. So I think that's kind of the idea there. That's not to like completely dismiss the Miami option, but I think it's a possibility. I guess the other one from like a Bucks point of view is the possibility that Brooklyn gets him. And I think, from what I understand, the Nets would be very interested in like Donovan Mitchell as the centerpiece of a return in a Kevin Durant deal. That being said, it's really hard to pull off from, obviously then you're talking a 4-team trade. You got to find somewhere to get Ben Simmons because of the NBA's collective bargaining agreement that says you can only have 2 of the designated rookie extensions, or only one of those designated rookie extensions acquired via trade on one team. I think the Kevin Durant to Phoenix thing is way harder now that DeAndre Ayton has completed his offer sheet, and so it's hard to figure out. And yet, I do think like there are kind of competing. There are compelling reasons that the Nets would do that, and you could get significant return back from a Jazz point of view from whatever team was kind of acquiring Kevin Durant, if that makes sense. So definitely Knicks number 1, Heat number 2, Nets number 3, kind of the field after that. But yeah, I think there is a really good chance that when Donovan is traded, it'll be to the Eastern Conference.
And I think, well, we've discussed this, but I think if you're a Bucks fan, you're probably okay with it being the Knicks, more so than probably Miami. That's probably what you're hoping for. Last one for you. I got to ask about you. You've gone from covering a perennial playoff team with, the hopes of being able to cover the finals and see the Jazz in the NBA finals, and now not so much. How do you feel about this? First of all, how's the last few weeks been, and how do you feel about this moving forward?
Look, like this last Jazz season, not including the last 3 weeks, was the hardest Jazz season I've had to cover. And I've covered the team from 2013. It was the first year I had a credential. So that was the last Ty Corbin year. That was when the Jazz won 25 games. Mm-hmm. This was harder in a lot of ways. This was, players sniping at each other, coaches sniping at the media, and players sniping at the media too. A new front office trying to establish and power and new relationship dynamics with the coaching staff. There were kind of all these players trying to like find a way with playing time. It was just tough, like from a media point of view. I think I'm kind of excited for new stories and new players and new kind of a fresh start. And I think a lot of people in the organization are. Obviously, yeah, the fresh start means that the Jazz are going to win like 25 games next year. And that's going to be interesting and, mind-numbing in its own ways. But like, I also know, again, from covering the team from 2013, that it can be like kind of the start of a new window and the start of something. And there are always, kind of storylines in the growth process too. So I am less pessimistic about it than you might think I would be. And I kind of do. I actually really like Donovan. I really like Quinn. I really like Rudy Gobert as people. But I just think that the situation was frankly toxic, and that it's restarting in a new and kind of it's spring for the Jazz again, or maybe it's the beginning of winter. But like it will be spring soon, and that's kind of exciting.
It's fascinating. It's very fascinating to see how it's all played out. And like I said, I don't think there's a huge coincidence that the Jazz probably potentially see a pretty fruitful NBA draft night next year if all things work out. So it might be in their best interest to lose a bunch of these games, and you can speed up that process there. It'll be interesting. We'll be following along with you. You can get Andy at Andy B. Larsen on Twitter. And also you'll see or find his work over at the Salt Lake Tribune as well. Been far too long since we spoke, Andy, but this was really insightful. I think Bucks fans are going to like this one.
Well, I'm glad, and next time I'm in Australia, we gotta find some time to meet up down there.
Well, I never need an excuse for a beer, Andy. So yes. I will be available. There's no doubt about that. As I said, follow Andy's work. We'll be back for the rest of the week. We've still got plenty to discuss on Locked On Bucks, so we're going to keep working through the off season. Until then, speak to you guys tomorrow.